Broadcasting from Manhattan Beach and the World Wide Web, you're listening to CHSR, HealthyLife.net.
As a service to our listeners, this program is for general information and entertainment purposes only. CHSR HealthyLife.net does not recommend, endorse, or object to the views, products, or topics expressed or discussed by show hosts or their guests. We suggest you always consult with your own personal, medical, financial, or legal advisor.
Welcome to Center Point. I'm your host, Dr. Ron Anbar. In this show, we will discuss ways that we can journey to our own centers. This can help us access our inner resources to improve our physical abilities and health, our mental strength, our emotional well-being, and our spirituality. And I'm so very excited to welcome a very special guest, Dr. Eric Spiegel, who is joining us this morning. Hi, Eric.
It's great to be here, Ron.
We've been friends for a long time, but because of COVID, we haven't seen each other for, I think it's 3+ years at this point in person. Let me tell the audience a little bit about Eric. He's a licensed psychologist in private practice in Philadelphia. He's certified as an approved consultant in clinical hypnosis by the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis. Dr. Spiegel is an ASH Fellow. He's a past president, and additionally was honored by ASH with the Early Career Achievement Award in 2012. He's the co-author of the book Attachment in Group Psychotherapy. That was published by the American Psychological Association in 2013. He's also published on attachment and hypnosis in the International Journal of Clinical Hypnosis and the American Journal of Clinical Hypnosis. And most recently, Dr. Spiegel co-edited a special issue of the American Journal of Clinical Hypnosis on relational factors of hypnosis in psychotherapy. And he specializes in working with anxiety, trauma, and relationship issues. So this is quite a biography. And Eric, maybe you can fill us in. We haven't really talked about attachment and as it relates to hypnosis. Can you tell us about that? How does that work?
Sure, Ron. The way you can think of attachment in general, and then I can explain it to hypnosis, is that attachment has to do with a biopsychosocial process of development that happens for infants and young toddlers. It's a point in the development where brains are rapidly developing, and in particular, the parts of the brain that are developing are the limbic systems and the way that people emotionally respond to their caregivers. There's a lot of literature about the importance in that stage of mirroring and pacing, and these are concepts that hypnotherapists understand well because they have to do with what's referred to as synchronization. So in the case of hypnotherapy, it would be between hypnotherapists and their client, but in the case of development, it's between parent and infant, and this is things like eye-to-eye gaze, nonverbal sounds like cooing, and so essentially what's happening in this point in time is that a baby's brain and their nervous system are becoming co-regulated with the parent. And so when there is healthy attachment, that process occurs over time, and that internalization becomes more consistent. It becomes healthier, and essentially the child is able to really kind of regulate that process on their own. And this includes things like how close or how far they are in terms of like interpersonal distance and comfort. So there was a very famous experiment in the 70s done by Mary Ainsworth called The Strange Situation that looked at parents and children when they were being separated at the daycare drop-off and found that there were appreciable correlations between how parent and infant responded. and that these variations differ depending on that attachment process. And what they found was that in a secure attachment, during this separation, the parent and the baby would be appropriately upset at such a separation. So there might be like brief crying on the part of the baby, but they would re-regulate pretty quickly after the departure. And then they would be happy to greet their parent on the re-arrival at the pickup. But they found two classes of insecure attachment. One was essentially that the parent and the baby were deactivated. And in this attachment style, there was not much emotion at all at this separation. In fact, the baby would actually look away from the parent. And, you know, the baby would seem pretty disinterested at the reunion. And then there was a hyperactivated attachment, and this was referred to as preoccupied attachment, where essentially, you know, parent and baby would both be upset at the departure. After the parent would leave, the baby would have a hard time calming down. And then really interestingly, at the arrival, the baby would still be upset. And then they subsequently found later on that there was another class of attachment called disorganized attachment, and this is like with really kind of traumatic backgrounds where the attachment styles were not even coherent, so where there wasn't like a consistent attachment style each time. So I want to come back to your original question, which is what does this have to do with hypnosis? Well, what we understand is that in the process of attachment, Ron, this attachment style is developing in the first 2 years, and then it becomes pretty consistent and predictable, so it kind of locks in. And the child and then adult sort of displays this consistent attachment style depending on that process. And subsequent research has shown that, you know, this isn't just about like interpersonal interactions and how close or how far you're comfortable being with people, but it also has to do things with like how you regulate your feelings, how you experience your feelings in your body, how you hold other people in mind and in spirit. So this has a lot of implications for people's functioning and well-being. But the really promising and exciting aspect of this research is that people can change their attachment style in positive and healthy and secure ways through relationships. And that can happen through, you know, close friendships or romantic relationships with people that are securely attached and empathic and attuned. But it can also happen through a therapeutic or hypnotherapeutic process. And so that's how I got really interested in the subject, was how can we use hypnosis in our work to help people be more securely attached?
Wow, so this really, I guess, pervades throughout a person's life. And so if I understand correctly, if there's a poor attachment style, that will cause difficulties in somebody's life for years, potentially. Is that right?
For years, and actually there has been research in the last 2 decades, particularly there's a group out of Yale by Arietta Slade, but this is happening worldwide. Peter Fonagy in the UK is researching on it, that has found that there is something called the intergenerational transmission of trauma. And so, you know, the thinking is that without the proper relationships and relationships experiences, this can keep getting passed on. So it's really important to identify it and work with it in treatment.
So I gather from what you're saying, when you're in a treatment situation, either through traditional psychology or using hypnosis to help with attachment, the relationship set up between the therapist and the client is key to its success. Would that be correct?
That's completely correct, Ron. And, you know, what listeners of your show will know from the various topics that you've hosted guests on, from anecdotes you've shared about your approach, is that, you know, relationship is so central, and that the process of rapport building, and again, whether that's through formal hypnosis or just informally through, a whole range of nonverbal factors that happen when people meet and when they connect, they'll understand that this kind of relationship rapport building happens immediately, and that there are differences. There's some people that we really click with right away, that we feel a deep connection with. There's other people that we don't click as well with. And it's really important in terms of, thinking about how attachment is repaired, but also thinking about how hypnosis works, that clients who are working, whether it's with their psychologists or working with their doctors, that they feel a sense of safety with those providers. They really feel like they can trust them. And then that allows for that process of rapport and synchronization to start to happen in the hypnosis.
Now, it would seem to me that if the therapist or doctor, as a physician, I think about care, mental health care occurs as part of being a physician, even if you're not a mental health specialist. You prescribe medication, if you're doing it well, you're using some psychology, and rapport with the patient will dictate whether the patient will even take the medicine. If you have a healthcare provider who he or she, him or herself, did not form good attachments, won't that affect their career and how they can help others?
Well, it completely does, and that's actually a great question. Ron, one of the things that you and I have often discussed, and we've discussed with colleagues in the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis, which, I'm assuming your listeners know is an organization that consists of healthcare, mental health care providers trained in hypnosis. One of the things that we've often discussed has been that doctors are often unaware of the power of their words, of the implications of suggestions that they may not even realize that they're given. And these suggestions can be positive. They can convey hope. They can convey optimism. They can convey a belief in the subconscious healing power of the patient. Or they can be negative. And there are all kinds of examples in literature, right, of doctors saying cavalier things to patients like, you only have so many months to live, and something like that. I don't know if a doctor is aware of the harmful impact that those kinds of words could have. But I think you're correct to wonder if the attachment style and those variances impact their capacity to form relationships with their patients and impact their bedside manner.
Correct. And, this is something in the medical arena we never talk about. I don't know in the mental health arena. I guess some mental health training involves doing like therapy you're receiving therapy for a while on your own, but I can tell you in medicine nothing like that ever happens, and yet it seems to be a very critical part of helping doctors become better clinicians.
Yeah, I'm reflecting on a conversation I once had with a patient who was training to be a doctor. And obviously, it's important, ethically important, anytime we talk about patient interactions to de-identify, disidentify any kind of anecdote. So I'll be very generic, but essentially the point that they made was that they had learned to put on a mask for their supervisors because they had recognized very quickly on that what curried favor with supervisors, had nothing to do with the kinds of emotionally present, empathically attuned kind of interactions that would help patients. Instead it was more things like, bragging, trying to magnify accomplishments, trying to kind of present this very sort of puffed out, accomplished kind of persona. And, it's appropriate to ask, is that training, is that kind of nonverbal, are those cues that are being emphasized in training good for doctors in the subsequent relationships that they're going to be forming with their patients?
Earlier you mentioned that sometimes relationships are formed very quickly, I guess, when things go well. And I've become more sensitive to that as my career has progressed. That on me, the patient, within seconds, I'll feel the connection occurring. Now, when it doesn't occur, I've sometimes thought, well, I think I attach pretty well, so presumably I had reasonable attachment background when I was an infant or a toddler. And when I don't connect, it's because the other person doesn't attach well. But maybe that's too simplistic. Is there sometimes just different styles of attachments that we don't fit and that doesn't connect? Or is it that I can connect well, but some people who I don't connect with haven't had an appropriate attachment style?
Ron, that is such a good question. I think it's kind of like all of the above. So, intuitively, providers and their clients both need to feel a sense of connection. And it's even worth asking and talking about early on in treatment, how our clients are experiencing that connection, because it can really yield fruitful conversations. And if for some reason there are some difficulties there that we may or may not understand, having that conversation can really be beneficial. But I think the second part of your question, right, is are there these kinds of different pairings? Can having different attachment styles make a difference in connection? So one really interesting thing I've found in clinical work that I've done and research and case studies that I've read, that sometimes, and this might sound surprising, there are different attachment pairings that tend to happen a lot. Like, for example, many times somebody who has a more anxious attachment or preoccupied style, so they're kind of hyperactivated, they're devaluing themselves, they're insecure about connection, they're pulling early on in relationships very hard for connection, they might get disillusioned very quickly. I find that sometimes people in that attachment category actually get drawn to deactivated attachment, what's called a dismissing attachment. And with these folks, they have like a very low anxiety, high avoidant kind of profile, and they're very turned down emotionally. And you might think to yourself, why would this pairing exist? And why would both people in some way be attracted to each other? And what we find is that sometimes it's almost like this dance that's happening where, the preoccupied person kind of has this chasing pattern, right? They're trying to secure love, but they're trying to secure it from someone who may be withholding in that. And someone who is withholding may be used to someone kind of trying to pull that from them. So it's not always predictable. I mean, sometimes the same attachment styles are drawn to each other. But I think the most important thing that I can share on your show about that is if you sense that connection difficulty is happening, it's really important to seek some professional assistance on that if it's really problematic. In my field, that might be something that we seek consultation or supervision about. For a medical provider, it might just be something to consult about with a colleague or a supervisor that you do good work with about how that might impact the treatment. And I think in really extreme cases where that rapport is just not happening, it might be appropriate to make a referral. I've often found, in those cases, that whether I initiate such a conversation or even a referral, or not, it tends to just not work out. Because, you can't get to more advanced therapeutic techniques, and it's harder to do meaningful hypnosis if there isn't that trust and if there isn't that connection.
But I was heartened when you mentioned earlier that the attachment style can change, because I can think of a handful of patients I've had where the rapport didn't seem to be there initially, but through our work together, the rapport built. At the time we were well into the relationship, the attachment became very strong. So perhaps what was occurring is this kind of attachment redefinition through the work. But I would say in those patients it took months to get there. It wasn't something fast.
And that's actually one of my professional interest areas, is how you use hypnosis to build that. And the short answer is that it happens through kind of repeated, as you were mentioning, over months, sort of subtle ways that we speak, ways that we use language, ways that we emphasize suggestion. And then it happens over time, through a process of building these arrested or sort of slowed down developmental structures.
Well, this is a topic I'd like to discuss after our break. I'd love to talk to you about how hypnosis can be used. And, for example, I want to know if age regression can help improve with attachment. We'll define that after the break. This is Centerpoint with Dr. Ron Anbar.
Healing and changing children's lives with hypnosis is very real and very possible. Dr. Ron Anbar's new book, Changing Children's Lives with Hypnosis, provides you meaningful stories and expert explanations to show you not only the process of hypnosis, but its many benefits for overall wellness. Whether a parent, practitioner, or medical doctor, this book opens the way to complete connection, so necessary for healing. Get your copy of Changing Children's Lives with Hypnosis at Amazon.com or visit dranbar.com.
HealthyLife.net, where positive overcomes negative.
Dr. Ron Anbar and his dedicated team of healthcare providers offer unique health services to help patients overcome psychological roadblocks or use the power of their minds to improve their overall health and well-being. At Centerpoint Medicine with services in La Jolla, California and Syracuse, New York, this caring staff are waiting just to help you. Find out more at centerpointmedicine.com. Can't wait? Make your appointment now. Call 858-201-4001. That's 858-201-4001.
Audiobooks gives you instant access to over 50,000 of the best sellers and hottest book titles in romance, mystery, fiction, and many other genres. Just visit HealthyLife.net's advertiser page and click on Audiobooks to get started.
Every year since opening Centerpoint Medicine, Dr. Ron Anbar has been overwhelmed with demand for his services. So much so that he has established a first-of-its-kind franchise opportunity. As a franchise owner of the leading pediatric hypnosis counseling center in the U.S., you'll be at the forefront of an exciting sector of healthcare as you increase your revenue. With low overhead and full support, it's your time to take advantage of this franchise opportunity. Just call 858-997-3196. That's 858-997-3196.
HealthyLife.net, where positive overcomes negative.
If you are a medical or licensed healthcare professional or just anyone looking for a qualified hypnosis practitioner, then go on over to ASCH.net. That's the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis. At ASCH.net, you can get certified, attend workshops, and even find a hypnosis practitioner or consultant. ASCH provides an opportunity to learn and interact with colleagues. So whether you're a professional wanting to learn hypnosis or a patient wanting help with a problem, visit ASCH.net now.
More exhilarating talk. HealthyLife.net.
Welcome back to Center Point with Dr. Ron Anbar and a special guest, Dr. Eric Spiegel, who's teaching us so much about attachment and how critical it is in terms of therapy and therapeutic alliances. And I'm sure attachment goes way beyond what's done in the clinical office. We talked about how hypnosis can be used. I mentioned age regression, so to me that means using the hypnotic state to revisit an earlier time in life. And I'm wondering if there's been research done on improving attachment, but for example, asking the patient to imagine that they were a toddler or an infant at the time when they're attaching, and then reshaping the experience.
Well, let me start with the big fish and then talk about the little fish. But ironically, the little fish are every bit as important as the big fish, and pardon this metaphor for all you vegetarians out there. But, the important thing is that you're getting your omega-3s in one shape or another. You mentioned age regression, and this is certainly one of those big fish examples. So there are a whole host of hypnotic techniques within age regression of how you work on attachment. And for anyone who's not familiar, like you were saying, with age regression, it has to do with using hypnosis to take our clients back in time. And, that may not be a literal reliving of the past. In fact, what we understand from, research on hypnosis, trauma, memory dissociation is that our memories are not like a tape or a digital recording. They're not, this precise, accurate recording. They're more malleable and impressionable. But, with age regression, what we're doing is we're using imagination to take someone back into this fantasy of how time was in the past. And what's really interesting about that is that sometimes that age regression is best done with a recounting, a memory of what was. And in that case, what we're doing is we're helping them develop and insert into this memory positive internal resources. So to give you an example, for someone who has a painful traumatic memory, either of being abused in some way or being neglected, I might help them to spontaneously imagine an object that they used for soothing. Maybe they imagine a teddy bear. Maybe they imagine a soft blanket. And so we work across sensory experiencing to really heighten the way that they utilize that positive resource. And then in trance, we work with them on developing in their own way how they might incorporate that resource into their memory so that it becomes less traumatic and over time actually becomes adaptive. But there are other variations on this type of age regression. One that's gotten a lot of attention in the last 10 years is a method that was developed by the recently departed Dan Brown. He has a book. I don't recall the exact name off the top of my head. I think it's something like, attachment pathology. It's attachment is in the title. It's like an 1,000-page book. But he talks about an approach called the internalized parent model, or the imagined parent model. And his idea here, and this doesn't have to be used in hypnosis, but I think it's best done in hypnosis, is instead of having our clients remember the past as it was, we can help them remember an alternate past, a past where there were the parents they wish they could have had, and essentially creating an alternate past, giving them this adaptive attachment. And one of the things that's amazing is our patients know how to heal themselves. And so ironically, when we ask them to select parents, maybe it was through TV they watched or a family friend they knew, they instinctively know how to recreate these scenes that are the way they should have been. Now, I mentioned big and little fish. This is an example of big fish. But one thing I really want to be sure to emphasize to your listeners before this segment ends is that little fish are basic hypnotic techniques that happen from the outset of hypnotherapy that are every bit as curative. And what I'm talking about here are just simple things like the way you use your words. So I've been very passionate and excited in our interview, but now I'm going to switch it up a bit, and I'll talk a little bit how I do. So I might just say something simply like, you're sitting in the chair with your feet on the floor, and you're breathing in and out. And you can begin to have a sense of a positive feeling developing in your body. I wonder where you'll notice it first. Maybe you'll notice a warmth building in your hands or a sense of feeling anchored in your feet. So let me just pause here. In hypnosis, this is something we call a truism. I'm just simply identifying things that are true, that are ubiquitous to most hypnosis and even therapy sessions. And there's something that our clients can't really dispute. You start to get into age regressions, it's more loaded. But I'm just naming something that's happening in the room. But what you can tell is that I slow my pace down. I get a more soothing kind of voice. I use my voice to emphasize particular things that are important to notice. And as always, I give my patients the choice to notice what's happening for them first. And that's very significant because then it allows them to construct what's most meaningful to them. But again, the reason I'm highlighting this little fish is because, it's real. There are the most little fish in the sea, and the little fish swim closest to the shore. And so you don't need to wade out into the deep waters to have these transformative experiences. Just simply being in these interactions of attunement with good pacing, where you're just being present, that can really be so many of the building blocks and seeds to healing.
Thank you for teaching us this with those wonderful metaphors. I wonder, you mentioned eye contact between infant and parent. Can you say something about eye contact between clinician and client?
Oh, what a great question. So, and this is not surprising given attachment issues. I've had clients who don't want to close their eyes in hypnosis. I've had clients I use clients and patients interchangeably. I've had patients who won't make eye contact with me. And just to be clear, I don't ask that of them. I've had patients who, may want to open their eyes at various junctures in the session. I think to just kind of make sure that they're still there or to kind of reassess the room. I mean, these are all, I would say, attachment phenomena that are related to their attachment experience. So one of the things I do with those patients is I just reaffirm that instinct to do whatever it is while also introducing the possibility of something that might feel like a compromise. Maybe keeping one eye open while they keep the other eye closed. Maybe closing their eyes for a few moments and then opening them only to close them again and feel themselves going deeper. So we make these permissive compromises that we recognize honor our patients' needs to feel protected while also helping them to develop new attachment competencies.
Wow. Eric, I want to thank you for teaching us all so much about the intricacies of attachment and how becoming aware of this can help us become better clinicians and help us better help our patient clients overcome any hurdles their poor attachment might have been causing their life, and how to help embrace a good attachment style that can help them for years to come. So, again, Dr. Eric Spiegel, thank you so much for joining us today. This is Centerpoint with Dr. Ron Anbar.
It's been great to be with you, Ron.
Make-A-Wish has been granting life-changing wishes for children and families for over 40 years. A wish is something that gives children the opportunity to look outside their illness and restore a sense of childhood back to the child. With the help of donors and more than 43,000 worldwide volunteers, Make-A-Wish has collectively granted more than 520,000 wishes worldwide. Dr. Anbar has referred many patients to Make-A-Wish. To make a donation, go to worldwish.org. That's worldwish.org.
HealthyLife.net, the positive radio network.
Healing and changing children's lives with hypnosis is very real and very possible. Dr. Ron Ambar's new book, Changing Children's Lives with Hypnosis, provides you meaningful stories and expert explanations to show you not only the process of hypnosis, but its many benefits for overall wellness. Whether a parent, practitioner, or medical doctor, this book opens the way to complete connection, so necessary for healing. Get your copy of Changing Children's Lives with Hypnosis at Amazon.com or visit dranbar.com.
Reach your health and fitness goals. Whether you want to lose weight, learn to dance, build muscle, or just live healthy, Beachbody gives you unlimited access to the nation's most popular fitness and weight loss solutions. Visit our advertiser page and click on Beachbody now.
Dr. Ron Ambar and his dedicated team of healthcare providers offer unique health services to help patients overcome psychological roadblocks or use the power of their minds to improve their overall health and well-being. At Centerpoint Medicine with services in La Jolla, California and Syracuse, New York, this caring staff are waiting just to help you. Find out more at centerpointmedicine.com. Can't wait? Make your appointment now. Call 858-201-4001. That's 858-201-4001.
HealthyLife.net, where positive overcomes negative.
Every year since opening Centerpoint Medicine, Dr. Ron Ambar has been overwhelmed with demand for his services. So much so that he has established a first-of-its-kind franchise opportunity. As a franchise owner of the leading pediatric hypnosis counseling center in the U.S., you'll be at the forefront of an exciting sector of healthcare as you increase your revenue. With low overhead and full support, it's your time to take advantage of this franchise opportunity. Just call 858-997-3196. That's 858-997-3196.
All positive talk with a mature edge. HealthyLife.net.
Welcome back to Center Point with Dr. Ron Ambar. That was a fascinating discussion about attachment and how it affects people throughout their lives. One of my philosophies in working with patients is to let them take me where they need to go. I think that if we think about this in terms of attachment, the parent, I believe, would be receptive to where the infant wants to go. And then I think when you have good attachment style, the infant is receptive to where the parent wants to go, and then it works together. So that kind of philosophy pervades the kind of therapy I offer, both when I first meet a client and ask them how can I help them, and the client may have a certain problem that they're not ready to face, but they're willing to work on something else. And I'll say, okay, let's work on something else first. And then when I work with the subconscious, the same kind of philosophy occurs. I let the subconscious lead me where the patient wants to go. And sometimes this takes you to unexpected places. And so part of being a good clinician, I believe, is to travel with the patient, not to say, oh, that's outside of my area of expertise, or I'm uncomfortable with that topic. So I'm going to tell you a couple of stories of how my patient's subconscious took us on an unexpected but ultimately rewarding trip. So the first patient I wanted to discuss was a 12-year-old young lady who had tried to commit suicide twice before I met her, and the reason was that she reported seeing a ghost that told her to end her life. And this patient had been seen by a number of psychiatrists, had had a couple of psychiatric hospitalizations, and was given medications to suppress her hallucinations, in fact, 3 or 4 different kinds of medications, and basically the medications made her quite sleepy, but the ghost kept coming. And she was referred to me because she had some anxiety, surprise, and she told me about this ghost. And my response was, I would like to speak with this ghost. Now, back up a second. I will assure you that I did not get trained to speak to ghosts in medical school, but I went to where the patient took me. And as opposed to the psychiatrist who worked with her and said, well, the ghost is clearly not real, we have to suppress it because it's interfering with your life, my treatment philosophy, as I mentioned, is to go with the patient to where they're at. So I'd like to speak with the ghost, and the girl said, well, you can't speak to the ghost, she only comes at night. I said, well, you can invite her, she'll come. I'm saying this to her because I figure she's in control of the ghost in some fashion. So the ghost shows up. I cannot see the ghost, but I can ask the girl questions that she'll and find out what the ghost has to say. So I asked the ghost through the girl, is it true you want the girl to kill herself? And the ghost says yes. And I said, why? And the ghost said, well, she's had a horrible childhood. I'd like her to be able to relive her childhood. And that kind of made ghostly logic to me. I could sort of follow that. And I said to the ghost, well, I'm teaching the young lady how to deal with her horrible childhood using self-hypnosis and other counseling techniques. And when she dies of old age, not if, but when, she can relive her childhood if she likes to. And the ghost said, that works for me. I would like to become her guardian angel. So I said to the girl, would it be okay if the ghost became her guardian angel? And the girl said, yes, as long as I don't have to see her anymore because she spooks me. And I said to the ghost, is that okay with you? The ghost said, yes. So I said to the girl, please say goodbye to the ghost. And the ghost left. And that was the last the ghost was seen. This girl had seen this ghost every night for months and years, and that stopped. And then we were able to take her off of the medications that she was on over the next several months, and after about half a year, I stopped seeing her. She, I think, left on just one antidepressant medication. I tell this story in my book, Changing Children's Lives with Hypnosis. But I did leave one part of the story out from the book. You'll soon see why, and I'll explain why I left it out. But this is the rest of the story. Now the rest of the story. So after this session, I wasn't quite sure how the girl would react. This girl had twice tried to commit suicide, so I asked her if it would be okay if we told her mother what had transpired. And she said yes. And so we went downstairs and we told the mother what had happened, and the mother said, oh, what did the ghost look like? And the girl said, well, she was like a 3-year-old girl in a white dress. And the mother said, oh, that's who I've been seeing around the house some mornings. Now, the ghost was never seen around the house again either. So the reason I didn't tell this story in the book is because it's a little bit unbelievable, number one, and the purpose of my writing the book is introduce people to hypnosis, and hypnosis by itself seems pretty magical in terms of just standard stuff, and this kind of spiritual stuff I thought was beyond the scope and might turn people off. I'm telling the listeners of this show about this because you've gotten to know me over the time, and there'll be more stories, because when you do hypnosis long enough, you're going to find some unusual experiences. That happens to all clinicians. So this is one of the unusual experiences. So when this happened, I told my wife about the mother's seeing the ghost. She said, oh, she's a smart woman. She just said she saw the ghost, so she could identify with her daughter. That's how my wife explained it. I'm not so sure. I think she saw something. Now, there is actually, I believe, a psychiatric term for mass delusions. I don't recall the name. So that could be another explanation. It was the mother and daughter had the same delusion of this ghost. Or, I guess, the out-of-this-world experience or explanation would be that there really was something out there that they called the ghost. I don't know. I guess if push comes to shove, since I've heard enough strange stories over my years of doing hypnosis, I wonder if there is something out there, be it a spirit or something that people interpret as the ghost. But to my mind, clearly there is more to the universe than meets the eye. There's actually evidence that we'll talk about in the future about how what we see is not really what's out there. What we see is what our brain allows us to see. And this happens because otherwise we might be overwhelmed at everything that's out there. So we see a filtered view of what's out there. So who knows? I know there are cultures where seeing spirits is the norm. In the Western culture, if you see spirits, you're called crazy or you're hallucinating. And I think we train ourselves not to be aware in Western societies. And again, if a child talks about seeing things, they'll say, oh, that's your imaginary friend. That's not real. Don't talk about it. So that was a ghost story. Another story, which I'll start and we'll have to continue after the break, is another patient story that went somewhere that I didn't quite expect and had to sort of wing it. So this patient was like a 16-year-old boy, and he came in one day and he said to me, hey, is there such a thing as having two subconsciouses? I said, I don't think so. I had not encountered it. And he said, well, yeah, yesterday another subconscious joined me. I said, well, how do you know? Well, I just felt it. So I said, let me talk to that subconscious. And as we've discussed before, you can talk to the subconscious by having the patient or the subconscious raise fingers, one for yes, one for no, one for I don't want to say. And so I said, may I please speak to this new subconscious? He said, yes. Is it true you just joined the patient yesterday? He said, yes. And I asked some questions. And after a while, it turned out the subconscious claimed to be a murderer who used to work for Joseph Stalin. And that the subconscious was looking for its family and them, and that's why he came into my patient. That's the story the subconscious wrote, or is told. And as this is going on, I'm thinking, okay, I have not learned about this in medical school either, but the philosophy is go with the patient. So actually, we're going to go to break, so I let the listeners think for themselves. What would you do when you get such a story? Would you say, well, that's not real? Would you deny the patient's story or his new subconscious story? How would you handle such a situation? So after these messages, we'll talk about what I did. This is Center Point with Dr. Ron Anbar.
More than 30,000 children and adults of every race and ethnic group in the U.S. have cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is a disease causing long-lasting lung infections, limiting the ability to breathe over time. Dr. Anbar participated in research that helped advance survival of cystic fibrosis patients by more than 20 years. He encourages you to donate to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation to help find a cure. It's easy to donate. Go to cff.org. That's cff.org.
HealthyLife.net, the positive radio network.
If you are a medical or licensed healthcare professional or just anyone looking for a qualified hypnosis practitioner, then go on over to ASCH.net. That's the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis. At ASCH.net, you can get certified, attend workshops, and even find a hypnosis practitioner or consultant. ASCH provides an opportunity to learn and interact with colleagues. So whether you're a professional wanting to learn hypnosis, or a patient wanting help with a problem. Visit asch.net now.
Constant Contact and your small business make a perfect fit for marketing. They give you what you need to succeed. Fast and easy email marketing at your fingertips. Visit the healthylife.net advertiser page and click on Constant Contact to start your marketing.
Healing and changing children's lives with hypnosis is very real and very possible. Dr. Ron Ambar's new book, Changing Children's Lives with Hypnosis, provides you meaningful stories and expert explanations to show you not only the process of hypnosis, but its many benefits for overall wellness. Whether a parent, practitioner, or medical doctor, this book opens the way to complete connection, so necessary for healing. Get your copy of Changing Children's Lives with Hypnosis at Amazon.com or visit drambar.com.
HealthyLife.net, where positive overcomes negative.
Dr. Ron Ambar and his dedicated team of healthcare providers offer unique health services to help patients overcome psychological roadblocks or use the power of their minds to improve their overall health and well-being. At Centerpoint Medicine with services in La Jolla, California and Syracuse, New York, this caring staff are waiting just to help you. Find out more at centerpointmedicine.com. Can't wait? Make your appointment now. Call 858-201-4001. That's 858-201-4001.
Radio your way. HealthyLife.net.
Welcome back to Center Point with Dr. Ron Ambar. Today we're telling ghost stories and murderer stories, I guess. This second patient whose subconscious said, hey, I'm a murderer. I'm looking for my family. So hopefully the listeners had a few moments to think about what they would do in this situation. And so what I thought, I don't think it's a good idea to have a murderous subconscious. How are we going to get rid of it? Now, if you want to talk psychologically, why did this patient have this particular story in mind? Was he in some sort of conflict? Did this represent the conflict he had? Did the subconscious represent part of him he was uncomfortable with? I think if I interpreted that, then I wouldn't have wanted to get rid of it. I don't think it's a good idea to get rid of a part of yourself that you're having trouble with. I think it's better to embrace that part. But since he's told the story the subconscious came from outside of him, I thought, well, then we should get him to leave. And maybe the subconscious come from outside would reflect a fear that something could take over him, or a fear of not being safe in this world. So the exercise of protecting yourself by getting rid of something bad would be a good one. So that was all in the back of my mind when I said, well, the only way I know of getting rid of something like that would be an exorcism. Now, again, that's not a medical term, but in the lay literature, you know what that means. Now, I've never been in an exorcism or knew how to do it, so we sort of winged it, and I said, well, what we should do is sit on the floor with our legs crossed like Indian style, and then both the patient and I were Jewish, and so actually we knew each other from our synagogue, and we chanted some Hebrew prayers, and then I invited the murderer's family to descend from the heavens, whatever that means, and then suggested the murderer join them, which he did, and that subconscious entity was gone. Now, please don't ask me to explain what exactly transpired there, other than the patient no longer felt he had two subconsciouses. But, again, the philosophy is go where the patient takes you. And even though it was weird, even though I was a bit uncomfortable doing an exorcism of sorts, it seemed to work. So going where the patient takes you is a good way to help people. And in our last segment, we usually talk about what you can do at home. And so along this vein, let me remind you that when you interact with your own subconscious, that you should go with where it takes you. Don't fight it. Try to figure out what it's telling you. So, for example, one way to talk to your subconscious or hear your subconscious is to close your eyes, and when you open them, the first object that your eyes lay upon will give you a message from your subconscious. And presumably this method works because the subconscious manipulates that object into a thought. I thought I'd tell you about another patient of mine and show you how you work with a thought to try to figure out what's going on. So this patient that I'm thinking about was a 12-year-old who became dizzy after riding a roller coaster, and he actually lost the ability to walk for a while because he didn't know why, but he wasn't able to walk. With calming down with hypnosis, he started to walk again, and then improved pretty rapidly over a couple of week period of time. By the way, before we met, the doctors told him, "Well, there's nothing we can do to help you walk. You'll get over it after a while." When I was talking to his subconscious about what had happened, subconscious said it knew what the problem was, and I asked the subconscious to please tell the young man what the problem was. And the patient viewed or saw a World War II airplane crashing. That's what came to his mind. So then you should have to work with that, right? So if you're doing self-hypnosis and you get an image, it's not really quite clear what it means. You need to figure out, what does this image mean? So when he saw the airplane crashing, I was trying to figure out, we were both trying to figure out what that image meant. This particular boy was fascinated with World War II. I knew that beforehand. And the first thing that came to my mind was this from a past life? Now, that doesn't mean that that's the only possible explanation. And depending on the therapist-client alliance, maybe a different answer would come out, or a different question would come out for me. But that's the question I came up with, and the subconscious indicated, yes, this was from a past life. And then we through, again, a series of yes and no questions, and also having the subconscious tell the patient some things in his own mind, came out the story that in the past life, this patient was in an airplane that crashed during World War II, and when he went on the roller coaster, and the roller coaster was quite big, turned over a few times, he remembered what had occurred in the past life and became frightened because he died in that plane crash. And then the therapy was, at that point, is to tell the past life pilot that while he dies, he's going to survive within the patient. And then the symptom of difficulty walking went away, and the patient was fine. So again, a very unusual experience, very unusual metaphor, and a weird kind of solution. But it works. So again, you work with what the patient gives you, you work with what your subconscious gives you, and then you come to some sort of resolution. So notice in these examples, never do I say to the patient, well, that doesn't make any sense. Sometimes people will come up with imagery that we can't immediately figure out. And in that situation, I suggested, well, let's let time pass. Maybe in time, your subconscious will provide you with more information that will be helpful in understanding what it's trying to convey. Also, I might tell them, when you're dreaming, that's a way of your subconscious speaking to you. And perhaps in your dreams during the coming week, you'll get more clarity on what message your subconscious would like you to learn. And again, I leave it open-ended, and this helps the patient sort of figure themselves out. So the bottom line message is we want to learn to listen to each other and listen to ourselves. And hearkening back to the original topic of this broadcast about attachment, I believe that an important part of attachment is listening to each other. And the infant-mother bond, or infant-parent bond, this listening is not with words, it's with facial expressions, with touch. And we I believe, in therapy can recreate that kind of attachment or reattachment process, which is how, as Dr. Spiegel mentioned, we can help our clients improve using all the fish in the sea that are at the disposal of both the therapist and the client. Thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to our next show. We have another wonderful guest, Dr. Roberta Thames, who has done a lot with hypnosis over her career. This is Centerpoint with Dr. Ron Anbar.